So good afternoon and welcome. My name is Gail Gemler. I'm the chairperson of the Interfaith Study Group's Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us today. There are over 90 people today on the Zoom webinar, people on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and I'm so grateful to all of you for being here. Today, our topic is activism. Our panel features 3 local activists who will be talking about their work. In advance of this event, I hope you had the chance to watch the documentary film John Lewis, Good Trouble. Many of today's activists are inspired by the legacy of the late Representative Lewis. On the day of his death, he wrote in the New York Times a script for how we can continue doing his important work. He said, and I quote, "Not one of us can rest, be happy, be at home, be at peace with ourselves until we end hatred and division." Throughout his life, Representative Lewis worked for civil rights and most importantly, for voting rights for all. He said, "The vote is precious, it's almost sacred, so go out and vote like you've never voted before." I'm excited to hear how our panelists see themselves in the story of Good Trouble, what inspired them to do their work, and how they see interfaith communities working together. Joining us are Umar A. Hakim, Executive Director of Intellect, Love, Mercy Foundation, Salam Al-Mariyati, President of MPAC, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and the Reverend Dr. Najuma Smith-Pollard, Program Manager at USC's Cecil Murray Center for Community Engagement, which is housed at the Center for Religion and Civic Culture. Because of COVID-19, the Interfaith Study Group had to find a new way to meet. So instead of monthly in-person meetings, we will be hosting monthly Zoom webinars. This is our first webinar, so please excuse us for any technical difficulties that may follow. Before we begin, I have a few Zoom pointers for you. Hopefully, you can see all the panelists right now, including me. If not, select Speaker View, which can be found on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. This allows you to see everyone at once. This webinar is being recorded. If you want a link to the recording, just email me afterwards. You can find my email address in the RSVP you received today for today's event. If you have a comment to share during the webinar, please use the chat icon to share your comment. And if you have a question you'd like to ask the panelists, please post your question in the Q&A area, and we will relay questions to the panelists. The chat and the Q&A icons are normally found at the bottom of the screen. And as a reminder to everyone at home, you control the audio level of your personal device. So whether you are watching this on your phone or your computer, if your audio needs to be adjusted, please take a minute now to make this adjustment. I'm really excited for today's conversation, and I'd like to pass the virtual microphone to the Reverend Dr. Smith-Pollard as she introduces herself and her fellow panelists. I'll rejoin you at the very end of this event. Dr. Reverend Smith-Pollard.
Thank you, Gail, so very much. I'm so glad to be on with all of you this afternoon, this beautiful Sunday afternoon, and grateful for the opportunity to serve as moderator and co-host for this conversation with 2 individuals that I consider colleagues, friends in the struggle, and they really don't need much introduction because they have done so much work here in and around Los Angeles and state of California and even abroad. And so you know their names, and I want to invite them each to just share a little bit about what they do. Salam, who runs the Impact, and then Brother Umar of Islam. And so I'm going to start with you, Umar. Why don't you share with all of our attendees today a little bit about what you do, and then Salam will have you come on in as well. And then we'll get into our conversation today about Good Trouble.
Greetings, Zoom world. How you doing? My name is Umar Hakim. I'm the consulting director for Intellect, Love, and Mercy Foundation. I wear a few other hats as well, but I'm also a community organizer or the board chair for LA Voice. And the work that I do in Los Angeles that I've been doing like for over like the past 10 years is organizing, creating advocacy around homelessness and around for the youth and around community issues with LA Voice. Lately, I've been getting into my own brand of work for Encourage as a principal consultant for my new organization. But I'm really excited about this, I'm gonna say, convening of minds right now. I'm really excited, so I get to hear the intellectual capacity of my two colleagues right here. I learned so much from both of them. You know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna steal her line, but she know what I like to hear all the time.
Thank you, Brother Umar. I appreciate you so very much. Salam, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is Salam Al-Mariati. I'm the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, which actually started in 1988. That's 32 years ago. So we've been working at this for quite some time. And I used to work with probably Omar's and Najuma's predecessors. That's how old I am. I'm the OG of this group. So we've dealt with everything. We've dealt with war and peace. We've dealt with uprisings. We've dealt with a lot of issues here in California and in Washington. Our main objective is to make Islam known for what it is to the American public, as opposed to what it's not. It's not radical. It's not terrorist. It's not oppressive. That's like Richard Nixon saying, "I'm not a crook," and that's all you think about. So trying to change the narrative to explain who Muslims are, what our story is in America, that's the objective of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And really, really glad to be with you, Najuma and Omar. I'm looking forward to this very enriching conversation, and I'm going to learn a lot. As my friend Connie Rice says, when she's around groups like, with Najuma and Omar, I feel like I'm going to have to pay tuition after this session.
Wonderful. Thank you, Salam. And thank you both for just sharing a little bit about what you do. And I'm Reverend Najuma Smith-Pollard. I'm program manager at the Cecil Murray Center for Community Engagement, and our work, and I'm also a pastor here in Los Angeles. I'm a founding pastor of Word of Encouragement Church here in Los Angeles. And the core of our work at the Murray Center is to work with wonderful clergy leaders like Salam and Umar and others all around Los Angeles around civic engagement, community development, some public policy work. And this is a really great time in our history here in Los Angeles, in the ways in which the pandemic and all of the racial conversations and tensions have really forged us all together. And we've been on a number of calls together, a number of Zooms together, a number of conversations like this and sessions. And so again, I am grateful for this opportunity to host and to somewhat moderate this conversation. And so we were tasked, each of us, to watch the documentary Good Trouble. And I would like to hear from both of you, just your initial thoughts. And then, of course, we have some questions. Just your initial thoughts on the documentary Good Trouble. And we're all familiar with John Lewis and his core work, but there were some things I learned about him. So I'd love to hear from you all, and then we'll get into some of our questions that we have. So whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Omar.
Go ahead, Umar. You got to unmute yourself, Umar.
Since I'm the youngest, they're gonna make me go first. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. I thought the film was very interesting. As a community organizer in John Lewis' early days, I could see a lot of the tenets that he helped establish then that we practice now. The door-to-door, what we call canvassing, the house meetings, the one-to-ones with different individuals. A lot of those tenets we practice now, and this is what generates our work today. And it was a quote that he said, or that I found online. I could tell his early days, when he ran for that public office, there was a shift in his whole life.
Yeah.
When he ran for that public office, he had to lose something to gain something.
Yeah.
And he lost his sense of fear.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think he did that earlier on, but in this moment, it was now against, he was running against a colleague. But his idea of good trouble, he mastered or totally understood the science of the system. From being, from coming in really young and to the point where he had now. So with that said, it was a really good film. It was a really good watch, and I totally enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Salam, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, I have many, but one of them that really struck me from the beginning of the documentary was what sacrifices people have made for us to have the right to vote. And that's something that we do not cherish enough. And if we believe that we are working for democracy, and we have a long ways to go before we see our democracy perfected, before we see our pluralism perfected, because we live in an imperfect union, of course. That there is a struggle involved, and that's what good trouble is. It's standing up for what's right, knowing the consequences, knowing that there's going to be heat, knowing that there's going to be attacks, and getting ready, putting your shield on, and weathering that storm. And John Lewis, obviously in this film is the feature of that person who walked the walk and became a member of Congress. But that struggle is more important than just the fact that he was a congressman.
Right.
And understanding what it takes to go through that struggle is part of, I think, everybody's necessary education and preparation to in order for us to be effective today.
Yeah, wonderful. I know that I was, there's a couple of things that stood out to me. And I think to your point, Brother Umar, his sense, how he gets to a place of fearlessness, and he uses the word fearless, which struck me because one of the things that resonated with me, what resonated with me was that, like, in order to actually be effective in doing good trouble and effective in moving this along, you do have to abandon yourself from this sense of fear. And I want to ask you both about that, but also, and the other thing that also moved me was how locked in he was, even though he worked on a number of things, but you could really tell from the beginning of his career or ministry, I would even say ministry, until his last days, how locked in and passionate about voter rights, voter registration and voter rights. Like, that was his thing. So I want to ask from both of you, before we get into question, what is your thing? And I know we all work on a number of different things, but what is your passion point? I know for me, and the reason I ask this question is because when I watched him locked in, I thought, okay, Najuma, what's your passion point? Like, there's a lot of things you're going to work on, but what's going to be the thing that you're going to go down in history for having made an impact? And for me, I really do hope it's this work around sexual violence awareness, especially within faith traditions, and really moving the needle on that conversation and even some public policy. And I'd love to hear from both of you, what, if and maybe you don't have it defined yet, or maybe you do, like, what is your passion point? And I know we work on a lot of things, but what's your passion point, Salam? What's your passion point, Brother Umar?
I mean, for me, what has driven me all these years, with all the ups and downs, and more downs than ups, is that desire, that vision that was given to us by our founders of the Islamic Center, Dr. Maher Hattout, Dr. Fethi Osman, Dr. Hassan Hattout, to make Islam an American religion, to make it understood that it is as American as Christianity and Judaism, and to remove the exclusion of Islam from the world of monotheism from an American lens. It is still excluded. Even when we look at our textbooks, for example, when you look at textbooks, they go from Greek civilization to Roman civilization, then the Dark Ages, then modern Western civilization. Well, those Dark Ages was Islamic civilization. So they blot out Islam. And by the way, they blot out a lot of Islamic African contributions from Mali and Darfur and Timbuktu, and the Moorish influence on Islamic civilization. So all that has been excluded, and that is the most dehumanizing feeling you can have, is when you're not a part of the story.
Yeah.
And it adds to the stereotypes. So to make Islam a modern American religion and give people that hope for the promise of an American Islam,
Yeah.
I think that can alleviate a lot of people's misapprehensions, fears, and that will bring about peace. That will save lives, in my opinion.
Amen. I appreciate that. Thank you, Salam. Brother Umar?
I think my driver has always been for the people, for people to feel what I feel within my faith. In 1998, I became I met my appointment to become Muslim, and at that point, I could see and feel then and now. And I always want people to feel I want people to feel the liberation that I felt in believing in one God. I want people to feel and know the tenets of my faith and how it could I'm gonna say free us from what's holding us back from getting our sovereign rights, our faithful wisdom and all that. So I think my passion, as you would say, is always like understanding the word philanthropy is really the love of people. So people have always been, wanting to see them always see us at the same level, so we could go get this diamond that's been promised to us.
Right. Thank you for that. And it's interesting that you use the word freedom, because one of the things that we see in the life of Representative Lewis was how he leveraged power in order to achieve, and as we continue to achieve this sense of developing power. So tell me, from both of you, from your context, Representative Lewis used his power, and he believed in establishing and building power. What does that mean for you and the work that you all do?
Well, I want to go back to the other point. Some of the lessons from the documentary is that voting, and I think this was a quote from Jim Lawson or John Lewis, I'm not sure, but voting is the most powerful nonviolent action we can take.
Right.
And understanding that voting is a part of nonviolence. And nonviolence doesn't mean you're passive and you just let things happen. Nonviolence is, again, as Jim Lawson said in the documentary, nonviolence is very militant.
Right.
You're creating a reaction that will lead to a strong protest and resistance to the status quo, and that is the essence of militant work. It doesn't mean you take guns and knives and what have you and missiles or terrorism and create that that's the only way to change, and that's the only form of resistance. It is non-violent, but it is very militant, and it is part of the resistance to the status quo. So for me then, understanding that value is really what motivates us, and what really pains us, honestly, is when we see our people not valuing that power within our community. Absolutely. And that we can create that change if we got more people civically engaged, if we got more people to turn out to the vote. How many times have we heard, have we just had another 1,000 people or 10,000 people, we would have had a different outcome in the election. We cannot afford to do that this time around.
And what's interesting is how much people don't understand their power, and and one of the message of John Lewis and his work was, by taking on these simple steps, as you mentioned, Salam, taking these steps and being committed to them is an act of establishing and also, promoting one's power. And that is not just our civil right, it's our human right It's a
Right.
part of our human dignity
Right.
to express our power through these measures. Brother Umar, your thoughts on Representative Lewis and how he leveraged power and established power?
Um,
How that translates for you?
since birth, the human being is been on a journey to build its own power. You know, from an infant into a young adult, into an adult, and then hopefully into a wise man or woman. And I'm gonna speak for myself right now. I got to a certain point where I recognize who has my power. You know what I'm saying? Who is holding my power? Who has been holding back my power? There's a phrase in Arabic that says, La hala quwwata illa billah. There is no might and power except for God alone, or with God alone. And in that, my understanding is that all of us are powerless, but the most powerful is the Creator Himself. So for us to tap into that power, and it's not a selfish power either. The cool thing about it, the power is it's so powerful that it could be shared. It's infinite, and it could be shared among everyone. But those who are holding our power knows the power of its capacity. And for me, our struggle, like John Lewis, he knew intrinsically through his struggle that voting is the thing that would tip the scales in this corporate society of board of directors or an executive manager, board of directors considered Congress or whatever. But he knew the vote can shift things, especially since the African Americans, are held, our power is within the Voting Act rights. Yes, without that, we couldn't vote. We can't vote. Right. So I just think us building our power to take our power back from those that's holding it is the one thing that this struggle is about. And voting is a key instrument in that.
And one of the things that we know is for this nation to change, because I know that's the goal, that's the outcome, is for things to continue to change. It also means that some who are holding that power, as you mentioned, Umar, have to give up some power. And that's really where the fight is, right? Is that in order for me to make this a more just society, I actually have to release some power. And that's part of the power, that's part of the struggle, or that is the struggle. It's those that are in power, who are holding the power, having to release power. And we see that even showing up in this current presidential race that's now begun to unfold. And we're going to get into that in just a minute.
Okay.
But let me ask you both this. Did you find anything surprising about the documentary as you watched it?
Oh, I found a lot of things. I mean, number one, just the story of John Lewis is really unknown to millions of people, and it's an amazing story. It's a must view documentary for anybody who's interested in this work.
Right.
If you think that you're ready, you're not ready, especially if you haven't seen this film. You have to see it.
Yeah.
The work that he did, and what I liked about his story is he basically responded to the call. I mean, our religions are talking about responding to the call of God,
right?
And he responded to the call, coming from a small farm and going to respond to the call of Martin Luther King and I forgot what his nickname was, but something about the young kid from wherever he was from. So that I love that part of the story, that puts it. Number two, it came from a perspective of faith.
Yeah.
And just like you and Omar were talking about, in terms of power, and the man whose picture is behind you, the Reverend Cecil Murray, taught me.
Brother.
Yeah, he taught me this, along with a number of my mentors, is there's no worldly power that is greater than the power of God. You have to remember that. And that is what and it goes to what Omar's point, how John Lewis removed that fear.
Mhm.
He went through those trainings, and we didn't see all the lessons that he got from the Reverend Martin Luther King, obviously.
Mhm.
But that is, I believe, where he got that fearlessness.
Yeah.
We have nothing to fear. We should fear God. God is the one with the ultimate power.
Yeah.
We should not fear any worldly power, and therefore we are ready to make that change, because the enemy thinks that we do fear them.
Right.
And once we do fear that enemy, then we've lost. Once we've overcome that fear, then we are on our way. We're on that path
Mm-hmm.
to success. So how faith is a part of this is central to the documentary, and how this helps you also clarify and crystallize your vision on why you do what you do, because you can get into office, you can have the accolades, you can meet with the president, so what? But what are you doing once you're there to leverage that to serve that movement from where you came?
It's wonderful. Absolutely. Brother Umar, anything that surprised you?
He had what was surprising, he has a quiet disposition. He appeared to be a very quiet and reserved disposition, but his actions, when how they say actions are louder than words, his actions penetrated, and I can only, for them to give him the type of send off, and respect that they gave him at the end. His position in the background had to be powerful.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't loud. From what I saw in the film, he wasn't loud. He was on the front line, but his whole persona. It's like being the pastor of the pastors. Right. It's the one pastor that everybody go seek his advice, because this young man is on it at the time, and I want to share. I want to get something from him. So, to me, the most surprising thing was his quiet disposition as a person. It was really loud.
Yeah, I kind of like a quiet storm or gentle giant. And to your point, Salam, I found myself tearing up at a couple of points in the film, and I'm a crier anyway, so that's not surprising. But just his I really felt like my history. I grew up in Santa Monica, and I really felt, to your point about how history's been told, I really felt like the school district that I came out of cheated me. I walked away from that. What I'm going to say is, I agree with you that anybody who's in this work of social justice, civic engagement, you actually can't do your work effectively until you've watched his life and to learn about his legacy. Right. And I felt like, oh, I got cheated in history class. Like, I didn't know about a John Lewis until much later in life. I didn't, this was not a figurehead in my history classes coming up. And I really watched it and felt I was cheated. I almost want to call Santa Monica Unified School District and say, redo the books now.
Exactly. No, we should. You're exactly right.
And anybody who hasn't watched it, and this is not smoke, this is truth. You've got to watch it and watch how much of an impact John Lewis had on the movement as a whole. So, and that's what made me tear up, was like,
well, you know what we could do right now is send letters to all the unified school districts in our area and say, this documentary must be shown.
That's a great idea.
Up for all the social studies, government classes, lessons about, from slavery and the racial injustice in our society, because this man, along with the people around him, really has made it for us to benefit from.
Absolutely.
We would not be here without the work of John Lewis and everybody, and Martin Luther King. There wouldn't be a Barack Obama. There wouldn't be any of these people, Kamala Harris, without that work 50 years ago. So we have to respect it and understand it as part of our legacy.
Yeah.
And when they take away that legacy from us, that is also defeat. As Malcolm used to say, they start teaching you their history about you. Once they do that, then you're stuck in that paradigm of defeatism and poverty, and then it goes to violence and so on and so forth.
Which then takes away one's ability to not only gain power, but to grow one's power and
That's right.
sense of power. And
It's
so
the
you
power,
guys,
it's the power of historical narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Power of what actually happened and what the lessons are from that. And when it's just a footnote, oh, John Lewis was a great guy. He was in Selma and he walked around, across, and he got beaten up, and that's all you know. So what, But to learn about why he did what he did, what happened afterwards, all the struggles and the struggles from within. For example, another lesson was this division in approaches between Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis. And John Lewis at that point said, okay, he was out, and he went to run for office after that. We are suffering from not understanding these different approaches to this day, that it's either resistance or engagement, as opposed to understanding that we can have both, and we should accommodate both, and there's an overlap between the two as well. Absolutely.
And often the stories of both of those individuals are shared in such disconnected ways. You don't even know that they've worked closely together. It's like you learn about Stokely, you learn about, and you don't get to see the full picture. So I'm going to say this: there's 65 of you on here, well, 58, 60 of you on here. The beauty of this season is that those of us who are parents and grandparents, you actually can show this film to your student, your child, as part of their social studies. So you can let their history and social studies teacher know, I'm showing my child, my grandchild, my nephew, this film is part of their curriculum in this season, because they're going to be at home. So please make sure our young people see this. It is so very valuable. So let's get into a couple of questions. And you're right, Danielle says he kept showing up. Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions. Let's get into the questions. People have had a lot of great stuff they're asking about. So there was a question that says, how do you see the strategy that John Lewis used in terms of your work today? He has such a strategic mind at age 21. How do you see the strategy in terms of your work today? And Umar, you go first, and Brother Salam.
As I mentioned earlier, as an organizer, I can see his strategy is practiced till this day. One-to-ones with the individual, so you can understand the common interest between someone. Canvassing, going house for house, spreading the word. Not just in today's world, we've been keyboard activists, but they went house to house and knocked on the people. Have you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote? Also, the network and the exploration, the exploring conversations deeper, taking what you learned in that one-to-one and turning it into and converting that into a whole strategy. All the things that they did then, community organizing are the basic tenets of community organizing today.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Salam?
Again, I think there's a lot that we didn't see in the film that really led to John Lewis being the great leader that he became, and the lessons. But he, like Martin Luther King, realized it wasn't about them. Yeah. It was about the community. Yeah. And it was about the people. As great a mind as Martin Luther King Jr. was, he knew that his meetings with presidents was not going to create change. That's why he decided to organize at the community level. And I think that is the strategy that we have to understand, is that our goal is to create change within the political arena. The goal is to change the policies. That is not going to happen without a social movement. Yeah, right. That is not going to happen without key engagement and understandings and difficult conversations at the grassroots level. We need both. So if somebody goes off to Congress and that person's just on his or her own, that's a loss for us, even if that person wins office. If that person has to remain connected with the community.
Right.
And so you are leveraging both the power of the people at the grassroots and the power of politics and people of authority. And you have to figure out a way to manage both. I think that was ultimately what he learned. And even when he became a member of Congress, he knew he had to get other people elected. That had to be part of the movement as well.
Right.
And I think that showed the greatness of this man. And he worked to the end, literally to the end. He was working. He was never going to retire from this kind of work. In God's work, there is no retirement.
No.
Worry about that in the next life.
Yeah, there's no slowing down.
Yeah.
Someone asked a great question. And the question is, does this generation have something like a crossing bridge moment? And I would say, and I'd love to hear from both of you, that I think 2020 is a crossing bridge moment. We've had a few others, but I think this year is a crossing bridge moment where we have this multi-layer pandemic happening, and how we get through this moment and this season has astronomical impact and influence on future generation, and not far down, like next year generation. So I think we are in a crossing bridge moment, and how we leverage our power, how we keep showing up, to Danielle's point that John Lewis kept showing up, how we show up in this moment, how we lead in this moment, how we're led by our faith in this moment. I do believe we are at a Pettis bridge of sorts. And some of us are working together on some bridges, and then some of us are working on different bridges. But I think this season is a Pettis bridge moment. And I'd love to hear from you both on that. And then we have some other questions coming in.
I agree. 2020 has been a real transformational year. I also think about the first Women's March. I thought that right there, I mean, because it wasn't just a local situation. Here you had three sisters that walked from like Brooklyn to DC, and then that turned into a whole world movement. You know what I'm saying? And which led to other organizers becoming active, which even activated. I thought that was another transformational point. Today, our young people are leading. As you mentioned, this is their crossing bridge. You know, they're using way more tools that's ever been used in the past. They from online to offline tools. They're using themselves. They're taking greater risks than anyone has ever taken before. And it's just like this whole moment. And then we're starting to see a community who we never thought that we would see come to our aid. These different allies. So it's like this big aha. If I was to name it, it's a big aha moment. You know what I'm saying? Now everybody gets it. Unfortunately, we had to get it over this tragedy, but now everybody gets it because no one wants this these type of social ills to continue. And especially for the African American, we still have the problems that we had in the 60s to this day. So this, as you mentioned, today is our crossing bridge moment.
Yeah, and let me just add two examples. Colin Kaepernick. Now everybody's saying, oh, he was right. Whereas before he was chastised, he was ostracized, he was condemned. But those people who condemned him in the past are now putting his image, even though they're not really doing justice to him as an individual, but putting his image of kneeling as something acceptable and something even positive. So that's something that we should not take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe others are doing it just for political correctness or saving face, but still use that and keep driving that message that we cannot live in a society of racial inequality. We cannot live in a society where brute force is used against people of color to satisfy the status quo. We cannot live in a society where still young African American men have more of a chance of going to prison than going to college. So we cannot live in a society where the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party takes our vote for granted. We cannot live in this society anymore. So that is where our bridge lies ahead of us, is to ensure that these are going to be the issues that are going to be discussed this week at the Democratic National Convention and any other political convention for that matter. The second crossing bridge for us was the re-election of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. In the past, when a Muslim was running for office, he or she would go like this. Oh, Muslim? I don't know what Muslim is. Because they knew that as soon as somebody found out they were Muslim, then they would be attacked. I mean, look what happened to Barack Obama. He had to hide his Muslim father's background throughout his whole administration.
Right.
But now it's cool to be Muslim. Now it's like, okay, yeah, I'm Muslim and I'm running for city council. I know so many young people who've come to us say, I want to run for city council. I say, great, do that. Don't run for Congress first. Don't run for Senate. Go be in your city council.
Yeah.
Get the local commission spots. Be on the board of education. That's our crossing bridge. That's where we have to go with the next phase of our struggle.
Can I add?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I add to? Also, I see a lot of people preparing only for appointments on the Democratic side, but we have to also prepare for the unexpected. I'm not saying I want this guy to remain in office, but if he do, we have to be also prepared for another Republican administration if that be the case. We can't just be ready for the Democrat to take office. We have to prepare to engage both sides and just as effectively and willingly. You know, I don't see anything wrong with us trying to get an appointment in a a Republican administration, because our communities are still going to exist, and we're still going to need to have voices at the table for us. So, you know, I think those who are watching, your voice is very, very important to your next door neighbor who do not understand as you do. You know what I'm saying? Get out the house while you watering the grass, have that one-to-one with your neighbor and let them know why voting is important. Don't tell them who to vote for, but let them know why voting is important to you.
That's good, Umar. That's wonderful. Prepare for whatever.
We have to
leverage our power, no matter who's in office, no matter what the tone is. And I couldn't agree with you more. Let me ask this question of you both, because we've done a lot of work together, interfaith work. How do you see interfaith activism? And to your point, Brother Salam, about the re-election, how do you see interfaith activism today? Because there's a number of different people watching, and this is an interfaith study group. So how do you see interfaith activism today? And what would be your recommendation or your input to those that are watching?
Well, just like John Lewis came from a faith background, and the Reverend Martin Luther King, really it was all about faith and creating change through our faith. Today, being a part of a faith community is really being part of an interfaith community.
Yeah.
You cannot be involved without being involved with interfaith communities. And so I see that as really the instrument for change. The interfaith community is the voice that will lead our country to stop wars in the Middle East, for example, because it's costing American lives, it's costing Arab lives, it's costing lives every day. These wars that people continue to use to do nothing but continue to arm already militarized governments. And then we're supposed to feel secure from that. Nobody feels secure. So our whole national security apparatus has to be changed. That is the Goliath that we have to deal with right now, is an over-militarized system. So it is through that interfaith work that we have to create that kind of change. Number two, it is through that interfaith work that we must, and voting, that we must, and one of the questions was about local elections, we must replace those people who have turned a blind eye to police brutality all this time and put in people that will do something about it. And this is an opportunity to do exactly that. There are more people ready to run for office, and it starts at the local and the state levels. Let us find those people and let us support them, because what's happened in the last 20, 25 years has not worked.
Absolutely. Umar?
And what was the question again, please?
How do you see interfaith activism today?
This is a question that Salam and myself knows well, and you too, Najuma. I may agitate some people right now, but I'm just gonna go on and do it because that's the job of an
Go ahead and make
organizer.
some good trouble.
Good trouble.
Yeah.
Get us into some good trouble
I'm
there.
about to get in some good trouble and take y'all with me. I think the interfaith world has to stop being so politically correct with one another and really talk about the elephant in the room, especially between one another, because we could actually be the moral conscious. We should be the moral conscious of all political matters. You know what I'm saying? They should come consult the interfaith community on whatever levels when they come to making a decision that's going to result in the world. So back to the earlier point of John Lewis losing that sense of fear, interfaith community is going to have to lose that sense of fear of if I say this, I'm gonna hurt this person's feelings. No, tension drives transformation. Diamonds are born under pressure. We have to stop being so politically correct so we can get to the core issues that we're dealing with, and not just say the feel good conversation, and so we can make an impact and change. I just interfaith 1.0, interfaith 2.0. I don't know. We need to go to interfaith 5.0 because right now, I think I heard this in the comments. I've always said as well, the sing along is not there. This is not a sing along anymore. You know what I'm saying? We have to get off that being safe tip and say what we need to say to one another so we can really get to a transformative point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I remember doing an interview about a month or so ago, and they asked the question, who should be at the table? I said, everybody. I said, this is all hands on deck season, and we don't really have space for anyone to be left out the room or off or from the table of decision making. And so this really is an all hands on deck season where all interfaith groups have to come together. So I couldn't agree with you more. And to your point about working together, because one of the things that we have to push back on together, and this really was a point for John Lewis, was voter suppression. He worked very hard to push back against voter suppression, and we see that those
alive and well.
Are alive and well today. What do you both offer? How, as an interfaith community, we can or should push back on voter suppression? How do we do that work together?
Well, I think as we talked about earlier, number one is to demand that our postal service is going to be fully funded. And it's crazy that we bail out Wall Street, but we cannot support our postal service. And for those who are going to mail in ballots, make sure you mail them in early and get the word out to do it as early as possible to make your votes count. Number two, I think we should have people assigned at every polling station and record any violation of voter rights, especially in areas where it's known to have voter suppression. Maybe not here in LA, maybe somewhere else where we have these incidents, but to position people in these polling places and to be on the lookout, because as the Washington Post says, democracy dies in darkness, and we need to shed light on that. So we should do at least those two things in terms of dealing with voter suppression and being aware. I think we also need to be more more fluent on the disinformation campaigns that are out there. There are so many disinformation campaigns that says, you know, they'll say something about Biden, they'll say something about Trump, and it actually was from you know, a foreign source, or somebody who doesn't want us to vote. We should always verify where this information is coming from. The biggest mistake I see among some of our social justice groups is they take something and they run with it without ever verifying it. And if our religion is about seeking the truth, we have to make sure we have the truth to begin with. So this is very important for all of us to be aware of as we're dealing with disinformation in the campaign.
Beautiful. Brother Umar, thank you, Brother Salam. Brother Umar, how do we, as an interfaith community, living up to the legacy of a John Lewis who fought very hard for voter rights, he fought very hard for the Voting Rights Act, and we know he would be fighting very hard against voter suppression. How do we, as today's interfaith community, continue to fight against voter suppression? And what should our message be?
I think it's just that simple. Continue to work.
Mm-hmm.
Continue to work. Identify an agenda that's common between all our communities and fight for that vision and push that vision. Send in our ballot certified mail so we know that so we get that signature card back. We know that our vote has reached the place. Get the tracking number, everything, but just continue to work. It's just that simple. Come out of the house. Don't be scared. And what I mean by come out of the house, stay safe, but come out of your comfort zone. Come out of your comfort zone and propagate this message of voting. You know what I'm saying? Use whatever means that you have to carry on the legacy of Mr. Lewis, because it's going to be very important. And don't think that you have a little voice either, because if you could tell 5 people, hopefully that 5 people tell 10 people, and that'll be the ripple effect. But my suggestion is just really simple. Keep the legacy alive and keep doing the work.
That's good. Now we're down to the last 5 minutes. I know that hour has gone by very quickly. It doesn't even feel like we've been talking for an hour, but we actually have.
Yeah.
And so in your final thoughts and comments, and I really appreciate you both for sharing with the 60 plus people that are watching actual strategic steps that we can take to honor the legacy of Representative John Lewis, but also to live into our legacy. And I don't know if people ask the question about who's next in line to carry on the work of John Lewis. And I'm always hesitant to answer questions like that. It's like, who's the next Martin Luther King? I don't know if God gives us more of those same kinds of people. I think God gives us like 1 or 2 and then says, now the rest of y'all follow the model. And I feel like, having watched that, it wasn't so much for any of us to become John Lewis, but to follow the model of a John Lewis. Because we may not get another John Lewis. But we can live up, we can follow the legacy. He gave us the model, he gave us the blueprint, and we can follow that kind of like a North Star, and then continue to bring those behind us along the way. And so what are your final thoughts as we wrap up? And I'd love for each of you to take a couple of minutes just to share your final thoughts. And again, mine is, I don't know if God's calling for another John Lewis. I know for me in watching, it was for Najuma to follow. I've given you a model, I've given you a method, now follow that North Star. But I'd love to hear from you, your closing comments and thoughts about John Lewis, and then even in this present context. Brother Salam, and then Brother Umar, and then we'll wrap it up.
You know, the North Star for all of us really is to see America get closer to the values of justice. And we see the aberration or the violation of that every day to this day. And I think there are 2 points here to answer your question that I wanted to touch upon. Number 1, John Lewis did not come from nowhere, and neither did Martin Luther King. They stood on the shoulders of great minds and great workers. They were not the saviors themselves. There is no savior. We're past that. Now it's about the people. Now God is saying, you as a community, start working towards the goal. Come to me, come to God, and come closer to me, and that will be your salvation. That will be your way of finding the answers, and you become your own savior.
I love
So,
it.
so don't wait for somebody to come and tell you what to do. Don't wait for that charismatic speech. We can find, I mean, we can go on YouTube now and find those speeches. So what? We don't need somebody to come and get us all riled up. It would be great, of course. I mean, when we come back, we'd love to get together and to enjoy each other's company and to hear a wonderful speech. But that's not all there is. So the idea then that John Lewis is once in a lifetime, Martin Luther King is once in a lifetime, Malcolm X is once in a lifetime, they came from something that was institutionally based. They came from a movement. They came from great minds, and they were in that position to capitalize on it and to be who they were. Number two, I'm sorry to take too much time, so I'll wrap it up in a minute, is that John Lewis's mission, he realized, was not complete. If the mission of Jesus and the mission of Moses and the mission of Abraham and the mission of Isaac and Ishmael were incomplete, then what's to make us think that, oh, either I got it all or I got nothing? No, it's where I can move the needle in my lifetime.
Come on.
Where am I going to make that impact? God, and leave the rest to God. That's what Islam is. It's submission to God, really, right? That's the definition, is when you submit to God, you are a Muslim. So submit to God, do your work, submit to God, and let God take care of the rest. And know that the mission is, the fruit of our work is going to be born after our death.
I love it. I think I'm gonna tweet that, Salam. Submit to God and do your work.
You
I'm gonna give you your credit, but I'm gonna definitely post that.
you can say whatever you want. You say whatever you want.
I love it. I love it. Brother Umar, final thoughts?
I have to agree with Salam. You know what I'm saying? You know, he's one of my mentors, one of the people who I look to. So his advice of what he just said, only thing I could add into that is for everybody who's watching, understand the struggle of your narrative. And do not and be the answer to the prayers of those who prayed for us. You know what I'm saying? Because many people jumped off those ships and said, I will not be enslaved. You know what I'm saying? Many people were pulled apart by horses. Many people were raped, pillaged, and villages was raped, pillared, and plunged for whatever reasons to instill fear. We are not, this generation is not scared anymore.
Right.
And we will say, what they say, truth to power, you know what I'm saying? And I understand that my freedom is rooted, my oppression is rooted in your freedom. So, you know, understand the narrative of your history and do not let it go in vain like that of John Lewis or any of the leaders that existed before us, man or woman. Do not take that, do not let that struggle go. Do not let it go. I always say we are the sons and daughters of Adam, and we was born to be free.
And wow, beautiful. I'm gonna quote you as well, Brother Umar.
I'm always quoting you. I don't want to take your famous comment.
I love it.
I just wanted to I am always amazed by your ability to navigate conversations, to get stuff out from people that they would never imagine saying.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Najuma.
It really is a joy of mine, something that this season has pulled out of me, and I am grateful for it. And to everyone that's watching live, we really appreciate you just being tuned in and listening to us. And again, please make sure you watch the documentary. When this particular conversation is made, the replay, go back and watch the replay. Brother Salam, Brother Umar gave us some very concrete things that we can do in this moment to make a difference. And again, people like John Lewis gave us a method and a model to follow. And in the words of Brother Salam, you know, lean in, trust God, but do your work. Do your work,
Yeah.
and let's get this work done. Let's move the needle on whatever we've been called to move the needle in. So thank you for allowing me to host this conversation, moderate. And Gail, we're turning it back over to you.
Well, thank you so much. This was really amazing. And for a kickoff event, I could not have asked for a more inspiring conversation from people I really admire. So thank you so much for joining us and making time for us today. I just want to say to our audience, if your question was not answered, there were just too many questions to answer in this program. And the second piece is, if you would like a copy of this video recording, because we did record it, please email me directly. I also can be a conduit for people who want to know how the film can be screened either at another event or maybe at a school. I know, I think the point person, so I'm happy to help be your guide. In addition, next week you will receive a handbook that was created as a companion to the documentary film. We have your emails from signing up, so we will send this out. It's a great resource outlining many ways for you to create some good trouble of your own. And the next Interfaith Study Group will be Sunday, September 13th from 5 to 6 p.m. That webinar will focus on climate change and will be hosted by a local teen activist who's a member of our community. So be on the lookout for the invite next week, and be sure again to RSVP to reserve your spot. On behalf of the Interfaith Study Group, I just want to extend my thanks to Salam and Umar and Reverend Dr. Najuma Smith-Pollard. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish everyone a great rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Peace
you.
out. Peace.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Blessings.
Take care.